Hello everybody. My name's Daniel McGregor. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. It's on the topic of accelerating sustainable growth in rail freight. The world is changing and supply chain stakeholders have higher expectations around visibility and around accountability. They want guaranteed delivery on time and in full, and they require dynamically accurate estimated times of arrival too. Shippers, cargo owners, manufacturers, and retailers, they all require digital cargo services to improve their own business processes and their planning. Now, this doesn't exclude rail, because obviously rail freight operators, repair workshops and transport hubs all require accurate data to manage their operations and maintenance. And they need to maximize their product life cycle management as well. And all of this needs better data. I'm Daniel McGregor. I'm the co-founder of Nexiot. And Nexiot is focused on digitizing the global supply chain using hardware, software, and analytics. Now, we'll get into Nexiot and a little bit more about what Nexiot does through the course of this discussion. But I'd like to introduce the guests today and my guests on this webinar. And we're really fortunate to have some experts with us from the industry, and each of them comes from a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to get them to introduce themselves a little bit in a second, but just briefly, we're joined by David Shannon, and he's the General Manager of RailPulse. So we'll find out a bit more about RailPulse as well in this discussion. We're also joined by Mike Boudendistel, and he's the Head of Intermodal Solutions at FreightWaves. So maybe if we go to you first, David, if that's okay, and I'd like you to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and a little bit about RailPulse and how that fits into the digitization story.
Thank you, Daniel. Pleasure to be here this morning. Again, my name is David Shannon, General Manager of RailPulse. I have been in the supply chain, transportation, manufacturing, IoT, and cloud solutions business for going on 25 plus years now. Spent my entire career trying to bring technology, advanced technology into the world of transportation, logistics, and manufacturing. Joined RailPulse earlier this year to lead the transformation for the rail industry. Very excited about the opportunity to bring these kind of telemetry solutions to the rail industry to help improve the service that the rail industry provides to our customers in order to hopefully gain back a market share that we've found ourselves losing to other modes of transport who've been earlier adopters of this kind of technology.
Thank you, David. And, it's interesting, the fact that we already get into this topic of share of the market. Obviously, road has been notorious for, growth over the last years. And so with Mike, I'd like you to introduce yourself as well, Mike, but just to let our audience members know, we've got a very nice balanced panel discussion here because I'm a vendor of this technology. David is applying these technologies to the rail sector specifically. And Mike has a slightly broader perspective. Although he's also a rail specialist, he's looking at the relationship with the rest of the supply chain. And that's why, this is a perfect sort of trio of experts or opinions. So Mike, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how your role fits into this story.
Sure. So I'm Mike Boudendistel. I'm the head of Intermodal Solutions at FreightWaves. And for those who are not familiar with FreightWaves, we're a content-supported data provider. And we sort of call ourselves the Bloomberg of freight. So we're the biggest freight-focused and supply chain-focused media company. We put out about 50 articles a day, have a full television program on freight and supply chain and logistics. And so we're the biggest in that media area. And then really the core business is the data side, which we sell data through a software as a service platform that anyone could subscribe to and have on their personal computer called Sonar, which has about 1,800 different data sources. A lot of those are proprietary to us. Shows you, daily, data points on what's happening in the industry. And then other customers subscribe to our data via an API feed that they pull into their own transportation management systems. And so, I've been with FreightWaves for about 3 years. I believe the company's about, 5 or 6 years old. Before FreightWaves, I was a stock analyst at Stifel and covered the railroads, intermodal companies, companies that manufacture rail equipment, and companies that manufacture, companies like Wabtec that manufacture the locomotive and components, companies that manufacture trucks and engines. So I've followed a lot of the different sectors of the publicly traded transportation and logistics space. And at FreightWaves, work largely as a utility player. Sort of anytime anything comes up on intermodal, I'm sort of the go-to guy. I mean, I'd say our data is sort of segmented into sort of 3 broad categories. That truckload, we do a lot with truckload, we do a lot with ocean, we do a lot with rail intermodal as well, and we work with customers on how those things all interrelate and how those apply to their specific businesses.
Thanks for that, Mike. And as you can see to the audience, it's an intriguing combination that we've got here. And obviously, this is a developing story, isn't it? I mean, it's not fixed yet. We're talking about data all the time. We're talking about different sources of data, and we're bringing that together, and we're trying to create new products and new value for all the different stakeholders through this value network. And thinking about the supply chain, everyone calls it a supply chain, but in reality, it's actually much more complex than a chain. There isn't sort of a set bunch of links joining that chain. It's much more like a mesh or something like this now. And we're reaching a super interesting point as well in terms of bringing the modalities together. And, you talked about data and about APIs and about accessing data, Mike. And obviously there's lots of different platform providers that are all kind of aggregating data. And we'll try to unpack some of that and try to work out, who's going to take which role and how that's going to shape up in the future. Let's get into the discussion though. And, maybe if we start with the question, this is a question of creating value. And, is the industry now awake to the true value of data? I'll just put that one out there. And maybe, David, you can have a pop at that because you know what the railroaders culture is and so on.
I think the answer is kind of a yes and no, because data can be applied to a lot of different areas of the rail industry. And I think it's fair to say that in certain areas of the industry, especially operational centric areas, data has been applied pretty aggressively. And we have things like positive train control that are further, applying the use of data. But as we look at customer service oriented uses of data and aiming at that problem that you kind of alluded to in the beginning, where customers are looking for, perfect visibility into the state of their cargo, and they want it on time, in full, every time, and even more so if it's not going to be for some reason, they want a high quality, high value estimate of when it will be delivered. I think that's where we in the industry are falling short, and some of the other industries, our competitive industries, such as truck we were mentioning, are ahead, and that is really part and parcel of where our focus is.
So you raise a very interesting point, because we just said the word customer, yeah, and obviously, when it comes to data, everybody wants the data. This is, we've got this complex web of participants and service providers, and we have third parties. And, all these, so, I think about it as like, we've got the shipper, the cargo owner, then the carrier, or the one that does the heavy lifting. And then we have, the ports and the terminals, and we have the customs departments. We've got regulators. We've got everybody wants a bit of that data. Mike, who's the customer for this data? Is everybody the customer potentially?
Anyone who wants to deal with us can be a customer. I mean, we have customers ourselves that are carriers, shippers. A lot of them are brokers. Some of them are stock analysts, like I used to be. Some of them are consultants. There are some in government that want to know where they should allocate resources. So I think there's lots of different constituents that can benefit from this data. I mean, a lot of the ones lately we've been working with have been some of the big CPG companies that want to know, a lot about rail service, really. I mean, is it worth it to use intermodal for the savings? You'd like to save a little bit of money and use intermodal versus truckload. It looks great on our ESG, slides and our investor relations section. But if service is awful and those products aren't going to be on shelves, you have a customer that habitually buys your product is going to buy an alternative product, might habitually buy that alternative product. So they can't afford to have, service failures. And, the service has been a challenge on the railroad. I think that's fair to say, lately.
Okay. So, we've got different sources of data, and maybe we sort of just give the audience a bit of a clue as to. I'll just tell what Nexiot's doing. This is one of our hardware devices, and this is called the Globehopper 3, and it sends its data every 3 minutes to the cloud directly from the asset and directly from the cargo itself. And this is what we're talking about when David mentioned telematics. There's different names for this, but maybe it's industrial IoT, or it's telematics, or it's a hardware generated unique data coming from sensors and sent in real time. Then we've got all this other sorts of data. We've got historical data from the clients. We've got from the shippers and the cargo owners. We've got wayside data. Maybe David can tell us a little bit more about this. We've got a legacy of data, and then we've got new sources of data. And, as you sort of, mentioned, Mike, you're bringing together different sources of data, creating value for all kinds of different stakeholders, and providing that through APIs so that they can then, optimize their processes and so on. So, are we talking about the same stuff? Is all data the same? Is some data more valuable than others? Is it going to be augmented altogether? How far are we away from that? I don't know. Maybe you start with this one, Mike. I mean, you've got sort of outside eyes on the industry.
Well, I think there's lots of different, types of data. I think they can solve lots of different problems. And like some of the data that you've just been talking about, and maybe that goes into things like tracking shipments, that might be one category. And a lot of the data that we have at FreightWaves really is more, centered around what's happening in the marketplace. Is supply demand tightening? Is our rates rising? All of those things that can position a shipper for negotiating a contract and for budgeting how much transportation costs are going to rise or fall in the next year. So a lot of ours are really centered around what's happening in the market, which is one reason why a lot of stock analysts on Wall Street like that data. I mean, that there's implications for what's happening as a certain stock's going to go up or down. I think that's different than what a lot of other companies I see in the industry doing, which are quite innovative and are trying to solve a different problem, which is things like shipment tracking and knowing exactly where those products are. Like some of the things we hear from shippers is that I know which container vessel my goods are on, and I know exactly when that hits the port of LA, but I don't know how long those goods sit at the port of LA before it gets put on a railroad or a truck, and you have this sort of black box, and like that's a problem that someone in the industry really needs to solve. So that's just kind of one example.
I'm happy to hear that, Mike, because we're solving that problem, and obviously we're working closely together with RailPulse and David's team. And I think one thing that you raised there is very interesting is that we've got already some data, but it's about how we bring it together. It's about how we analyze that data. It's about what context we can bring to that data in order to make it valuable for various stakeholders. And when you think about something arriving on the dock off a vessel, many cases you don't even know it's arrived, and then you don't know that it's available to collect, and it's difficult to organize the transportation inland for that asset when there's lots of competition. We've seen this problem, 100 vessels off the coast of LA, just towards the end of the COVID, pandemic, and it's everyone's thinking of it. Well, it's a different reason that everybody gives you. Some people it's a lack of truck drivers, some people it's a lack of technology or lack of data. Maybe now we jump to you, David, for a quick second and just ask, you've joined RailPulse a couple of years ago now, I believe, and you've basically integrated many different rail stakeholders who were potentially in the past competitors and wouldn't have seen, the opportunity to work together as something positive. how did you do that? Because, obviously there's stakeholders all over the supply chain that need to be brought together to share data. How was that a success?
Yeah, I think that's a very key observation, Dan, is that RailPulse is a consortium of stakeholders from across the rail industry. So we don't represent any one element of the industry. We represent, the breadth of the industry, the railroad operators, car owners and leasing companies, shippers who own rail cars, et cetera, short lines and Class 1 railroads. And when you look at that group, they're not, they're all part of the same industry. As you say, sometimes they're competitors. They have to work together in order to solve the needs of their end customer who's moving cargo. And how did they come together really is, in some sense, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So within the rail industry, we've had a number of leading lights in the industry came together who all were seeing the same trends, the same dangerous looking trends for the industry, which was, it wasn't I was losing share to my competitor, et cetera, but we as an industry writ large were suffering due to our inability to service the customers the way they want, and they were starting to vote with their feet, and they were moving cargo to other modes of transport. And where we were seeing other modes of transport with accelerating market shares or share growth, we were seeing the rail industry in a very stagnant situation, even losing some share. And when sort of these leading lights in the industry saw that, they came together and said, hey, we need to work together. This is a problem none of us as individuals can solve, because none of us as individuals service the entire need of a customer to get their cargo from, say, that Port of Long Beach to the end consignee, and to get an empty rail car to that shipper so that they can actually move cargo from point A to point B. And so they came together and we said, we need to create something different. We created RailPulse. RailPulse is a coalition by design from across the industry. So it doesn't just represent one element, the car owner or the railroad. It is a coalition by design of all elements, car owners, railroads, shippers, and together all of the stakeholders that are necessary to collaborate and cooperate to deliver high quality service for the industry. And together we are putting together a solution, working with companies such as yourself to bring all of the information that exists today from existing railroad systems, like car location messages from those EDI devices on the wayside, the electronic identification tags, the waybill information that exists, but bring that together with real-time visibility, providing information like the devices your company and others make, to deliver a complete, continuous picture to that end shipper and consignee, so that they can have the same kind of confidence in the service they're getting from rail as they get from other modes of transport. And in doing that, our objective is to lift the industry, as a whole, versus lift one participant in the industry versus another.
Well, I think that's a critical decision, and obviously it's timely as well. And, just to jump to you for a second, Mike, because you've got rail perspective, but also in the context of wider supply chain. Were people voting with their feet, moving towards road transport options because of what reason? Reliability or price, or what was the thinking or the logic behind that? And therefore, how can rail reposition itself effectively?
Yeah, so I thought throughout last year, particularly last year, let's say the third quarter, it was service was really the big issue. Last year, in the middle part of last year, intermodal had just all these service issues. Either the containers were in the wrong places, there wasn't enough space at the terminals, there was a shortage of draymen, there weren't enough chassis. There were just all these issues, and we heard from some shippers that said that they just had to go into the terminals in Chicago, pull their goods out of those intermodal terminals that that was the point of origin, and truck them down to, let's say, Atlanta, because they just weren't going to be where they needed to be on time. So last year I thought it was kind of a service failure. This year intermodal volumes have held up a lot better, and I think the reason for that is because inventories are really elevated for a lot of retailers. I mean, the inventories aren't elevated for every type of good, but in general, they're at a high level as consumers have pulled back. So that's reduced how much speed has been required, and so therefore it's almost like there's been some warehousing, on the railroad. So rail volume have held up, this year. But one trend we have seen is that the truckload spot rates have really sort of fallen off a cliff, including a lot of the lanes that are competitive between truckload and intermodal. Let's say between Chicago and Atlanta, Chicago and Newark, those rates have really fallen off, and so there, the highway carriers have actually taken some share from intermodal that would have gone on intermodal under the contract, has gone to the highway just because it was cheaper. So market seems to be changing, pretty quickly, and rates have changed a lot faster in particularly the truckload spot market than they have in other modes.
So realistically, if you could get sort of near real time or real time visibility on the assets and on the cargo, you could add a level of predictability there, and you could actually safeguard your processes in terms of handling and transfers and so on. Then do you feel, Mike, that a lot of those customers would be a lot more comfortable to use rail, especially for the long journey, and use road for the first and last mile?
I think that's right. So with intermodal, you can use it if you know that the goods are going to be there when you need them to be there, and typically it is like, if you have good service, it's like truckload plus 1 day, and it's fine that it takes an extra day. It'd be fine if it took an extra 2 days if that was consistent. But what you can't have is sometimes it takes truckload plus a day, and other times it's truckload plus 5 days, and then you can get into a crunch where you just don't have those goods where you need where they need to be. And so that's the type of thing where shippers will look at that and say, no, it's not worth the savings to use intermodal. But the more the more data you have, the more you can say manage those inventories at a level that is appropriate for what type of service you're getting.
Okay, super. So, David, it's not a small thing to bring together such a large group of people and get sort of everybody onto the same page and determined to to create some new source of value from data. And obviously there's the rail in the US. It's an incredible story. It really was the critical sort of driver of growth as the railroad went west. Towns sprung up, and it opened up new markets and new opportunities to travel and to set up cities. And that we've seen over the last sort of few years the rise of the mega city and the need for urban centers to have all of their goods and the things that they need delivered, and also transport access and so on. So we're reaching a point now where Rail Pulse is quite bedded in, and there's a good concept. We've been working together with you guys in terms of trialing and setting up the devices, installing them, and so on. So how do you feel this is progressing? Are we on track? Is everybody on the same page, and are people determined to drive this through? I know that I've spoken to Mike and to some of your colleagues, and everybody seems extremely motivated on this, and it's a hugely passionate group of people. How is it coming along? Maybe you could give us the latest on Rail Pulse.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Rail Pulse, it got started a couple of years ago, really getting our legs and really moving out, starting this year, working with companies such as yours to actually prove and demonstrate the solution that we're actually out to deliver to serve the customer. I think it's going outstanding. What we are seeing now, we started as a coalition of 5-member companies. We're up to 7 now. We have Class 1 East Coast, Class 1 West Coast. We have short line railroads. We have leasing companies all joined together. We're working with some shipper companies that we expect to join Rail Pulse, all of them with this shared vision and motivation that, we together as a coalition can do much better and serve the needs of the industry's customers much better as a team. And from the perspective of actually, boots on the ground, doing what we say we're going to do. We started with, to be perfectly candid, we want to make sure that when we deliver this solution and we tell the market that, hey, we can deliver you a more reliable data about your cargo, about your rail car, about your shipments, we want to make sure what we say is true. So we started this whole program with some very aggressive quantitative assessments of various technologies that we want to include into RailPulse, yours being one, and are now moving on to deploying the technology onto a large trial fleet, and that will continue through the remainder of this year with an objective that by this time next year, we're taking on shippers and other customers, other railroads, other leasing companies, et cetera, to join RailPulse as either members or subscribers. So things are going very well right now, and we're super excited about the progress we're making.
It's really encouraging to hear. And, something going back to something you said earlier, Mike, you mentioned that you're providing data to all kinds of different stakeholders through APIs, and you're particularly interested in your data is, the financial sector and, everybody who's trying to look into the future and make strategic decisions. And, part of this, real-time data, obviously, gives leaders a chance to make decisions in real time and, to respond to events that are happening in their network and for their customers and so on. Now, everybody seems to have a platform at the moment. And obviously, this is good. We need platforms. But, obviously, everybody's going to do a slightly different part of that. And the RailPulse is also, to some degree, a platform. How does this data come together, or is everyone going to do their own thing? Is it difficult to say yet, or do you think that we're going to see a natural sort of sharing of roles according to expertise as we go forward?
Yeah, so I think the companies that use our data the most effectively are the ones that are pulling it in via API, and they're combining that with their own proprietary data to give them insights into the marketplace. And so like a lot of our customers are, brokers or 3PLs, and those companies, I mean, they don't have assets, other than they say the people are their assets, and really sort of their data and information systems, a lot of those that they build out, to great expense. They have proprietary data because, the key to a broker is margin on a particular load. And so they feel like they have a system oftentimes that's superior to the market, and that helps their brokers to, just really have their hand on the pulse of the market. They can, let's say they know, most of the lanes in the country, but they don't know all the lanes. And so they'll pull in our data to fill in the blanks that they don't have. And so I think you combine, your own data with outside data, that's very powerful. I also think that, another trend I've noticed is a lot of the companies that get the most value out of, let's say, rail intermodal data would maybe not be the railroads. They might be the trucking companies and want to, see the areas that they're not already the expert in. And the railroads, a lot of times, we're able to help them, out the most with truckload data to help them price to the market, or ocean data to see, what's coming in for them to allocate resources, because it's hard to out railroad the railroad. So I really think, use data to fill in the gaps of what you don't know, rather than use data to just confirm what you already know.
Well, that's very salient advice, and I like that. I mean, with the way that we think about data here at Nexiot is we think that, the most valuable information or the most valuable knowledge is hidden in the 0.0001% of the data. And obviously, there's all kinds of events and noise that we have to isolate those important events from with machine learning algorithms and, by processing the data using, all kinds of digital processing techniques. Now, when we look at this, the topic of our discussion is about sustainable growth. And just to clarify, I'm not talking about the ESG stuff, although it's very important that we make sustainable transports for the world. And that's maybe a topic for another discussion. But when we look at sustainable growth, we want to create real value for everybody, including the railroad operators and the rail car owners themselves. So, for example, if something gets hit, there's a collision in the processes. If it's too hard, if you know that 3G happened, it's almost irrelevant, because you need to know how long that 3G was sustained. You need to know what likely caused it. You need to know the location and the time exactly, and have some data record to be able to use that to demonstrate these things. So it might be that the process outcome is to train somebody, or it might be to renegotiate a contract, or it might be to send the data to an insurance claims team so that an insurance claim can be made, etc. So we've got optimize the asset, optimize the processes, and then we've got optimize the services. Is that more or less right, David? Is that how you see things? Is that how it's going to evolve, that everybody can use that data, whether it's yourself that's creating it or for third parties?
Yes, I think that's a fair characterization, and you made a really interesting point about that shock event. And when we as RailPulse are looking at the data that is important to ultimately deliver high service, we think it's more than just where's my stuff. It's what's the condition that my product has seen during its journey. What is the condition of the actual rail car on which my product is riding? Is everything safe? So when we look at, what's going to be necessary to deliver sustainable growth, it's really all about delivering a service that's of super high quality by using data, not just about, location, but location, condition, and the health of the assets the cargo is moving on. So a very important example you just gave, that shock event could be interesting to the cargo owner. So it could be a source of damage, and it's important to know where it occurred, why it occurred, so that perhaps it doesn't occur in the future. So we can, like you said, use it as a training tool. Could be very important to the car owner, because, damage may actually occur to the car as a result of an event like that. But we see it very important from a sustainable perspective to give a high quality service that is both location and ETA, et cetera, to the end shipper and consignee, but also to the stakeholders that are making that happen, because they're the ones that ultimately have to deliver that service. So they need the data as well to ensure that they can deliver the service. So
yes, it's true. Everybody needs part of that data. And obviously, the asset, the quality of the asset, the health of that asset determines the cargo's arrival quality and the state of that cargo. Yeah. So, you're looking at braking behavior. You're looking at impacts. You're looking at vibrations. What other kinds of things can give us an indication as to the health of the fleet, and how can that support the customer?
Well, certainly on day one, we're looking at 5 key attributes that we think are absolutely critical to deliver a high quality and safe service. You indicated a couple of them there. Obviously, shock and impacts that are seen by the car and therefore cargo. The braking system, more importantly, or more relevantly in our case, the handbrake itself. We want to make sure that rail cars aren't leaving a terminal, for example, or a yard with a brake set and having to be pulled off and put on a siding. That's going to both cause potential damage to the car, but also any lading that's on that car is going to get delayed, et cetera. We're also looking at and want to monitor things like, is the car loaded, empty, partially loaded, et cetera, because that's going to be critical. If I need an empty car in order to move cargo, it certainly is helpful to have a really good, clear picture of where all the empties are and make sure an empty is truly empty, not partially loaded for whatever reason. And then, are the hatches and doors all fully closed and sealed before a car leaves? There's some cargo that travels on rail that can be very dangerous, and we want to make sure it's properly closed up. And obviously, if there's cargo in a boxcar traveling down the roads and it's outside of a place where it should be, the door should be open, and we detect an open door, well, there's an indication of possibly some ne'er-do-well trying to do something that also is going to have a negative impact on both the railroad and the operator, but obviously the shipper and consignee who's reliant on that freight. So we're looking at a number of things on day one. And then on top of that, as we look into the future with companies like yourself and our stakeholder members and shippers, they're going to tell us what's most important next. Maybe it's for the health of the rail car, vibration and bearing health monitoring, wheel kips, things like that will help ensure that the rail cars are really in the best condition to deliver the service they're designed to deliver. Or it might be more cargo-centric kind of indicators like temperature, humidity, pressure on a vessel, et cetera, for a tank car that are important to the shipper and consignee and tell them about the health and quality of their cargo as it's being delivered. So we at RailPulse view this as not just we got 5 elements and we're going to stop there, but we got 5 elements, which is the beginning of a journey. It's the tip of the iceberg. And we're going to let the market inform us as to what the critical priorities are to continue to improve the quality of data and therefore quality of service that we as an industry can provide to the ultimate shipper and consignee.
Thanks so much for those examples. Can you see me again now, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. So, thanks so much for those examples, David. It's really interesting, and even though we're going through quite a lot of examples, it gives, I think, the audience who are generally experts in rail and people who are passionate about rail and railroaders themselves, it gives them a feeling as to what's coming. So, I think that's extremely valuable. Now, one thing that you mentioned was this idea of monitoring brakes, and then we talk about digital automatic coupling. The positive train control obviously is a critical moment for the industry. And, Nexiot has done a deal with Knorr-Bremse in the North American market. It's called New York Air Brake. And we're actually connecting the brake data from, the brakes themselves, the brake subsystems themselves. And, this is actually a fantastic opportunity to look at whether you repair or replace, and whether to repair now or whether to leave it for longer, especially with these safety critical topics. And I think that, when we look at, maybe I'll come to you now, Mike, when we think back to, I think it was around a year ago, we saw there'd been lots of thefts from the rail tracks in Los Angeles area. And, it's quite shocking, really, to see that the things can get broken into so easily. And when you think of a North American rail composition, it can be, 2,000 meters or more long. And everybody jumps into the media and says, oh, it's because, we've defunded the police, or it's because, we don't have enough security, or it's because of some politician made a decision about, the port and how where the exit is, or we don't have enough truck drivers. But actually, my point of view is that, the rail cars, if they're stopping in a high risk area, there's a lot bigger chance that things get stolen, and we actually have to make sure that we're utilizing the assets, and the assets are well maintained, and the routes are well organized. Now, is that true, Mike? I mean, do we reach a point where these things really should be a thing of the past, because we should have the data and we should have the knowledge at our disposal and the right tools at hand?
Yeah, in terms of things getting stolen off of trains, it makes a lot of media headlines. I don't know how widespread that issue is. Like, it's not something that, to think of it from a perspective of a financial analyst, that it tends to move the needle. I agree with you that if, the railroad is stopped, it's not efficient. And, ideally you'd have a rail yard where you don't have a lot of rail cars, in it, because they're all out in revenue service. But, those things can be kind of public embarrassments for the railroads. And you think of the one a few years ago where I think it was Norfolk Southern had guns stolen from one of its trains in their yard in Inglewood on the south side of Chicago. And it's kind of like, of all the places to have a bunch of guns stolen, it was there. But, I don't know that that specifically is a terribly, widespread problem.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm happy to hear that, because I think it's, it is a sort of a one-off, these types of events. And actually, the way that you steered that discussion there, I really appreciate that, because in the end, we're talking about scalability, we're talking about large volume, we're talking about things that do move the needle. And what David was just talking about in terms of, first of all, making sure that the assets are available to use and that they are, we can get them to the customer on time, and that the customer, can get the full use out of them as per their expectations. And then also that they've got optionality on their transportation modalities, that they can make decisions, according to trends and availability of other transportation assets and so on. So does this make it, does it make growth more sustainable, David? I mean, how much more sustainable can we make that growth? Because obviously, it's no longer acceptable to be at the mercy of the others. We have to take control, yeah?
Yeah. So I think, we talk about sustainable growth, and I would just say, let's differentiate what would be unsustainable growth and then compare it. And so we might look at, COVID as an event, right? And we saw, this event, for a variety of reasons, move the needle in terms of what cargo was moving and what modes it was moving on, and that kind of stuff. But there were externalities that drove those transitions between what mode of transport a particular company was using. And as we move back to sort of a more normal world, let's hope we are, the traffic people and folks in manufacturing supply chain organizations are going to start making decisions again based on, the key characteristics of the mode of transport. And in order for us to sustainably grow, not react to events, we need to make sure that the things that would enable or drive, a transportation professional to choose one mode of transport over another are being addressed. We know that for cost reasons, rail should win. For ESG reasons, rail should win. For a lot of reasons, rail should win in the mind of that traffic manager. But at the end of the day, as Mike pointed out, if at the other end of the journey, the manufacturer or consignee cannot get the cargo or cannot rely on its delivery because either they have lack of information or inconsistent delivery times, all those other three benefits are gonna fall to the side, right? So for sustainable growth, and this is what our focus is, for sustainable growth, we want to make sure that other decision driver is being addressed. The customer service decision driver, the safety decision drivers, et cetera. And to do that, we need it's data. It's all about data. It's all about bringing together the information across the entire journey for both the laden and the empty rail cars to ensure both an efficient use of the fleet so that it's ready and available to be used or be supplied to a shipper when he needs to load a car. And when a car is laden and it's on a journey and it's on its way, we need to stitch together the information, both existing and the new information from sort of the telematic devices that you all make and others, to give the shipper the confidence that when we say it's going to be there on such and such a date, they can trust it and they can see that it's progressing in the journey the way it's supposed to. And oh, by the way, if something happens, because things happen in the transport networks, especially a complex network like the rail network, we can give good insights as early as possible that something has happened. And we can give good insights as to what the recovery will be, because as that manufacturer or as that consignee on the other end of that journey, what matters to me is not being surprised. I used to run a manufacturing team. The worst thing in the world was when you're trying to staff up and run a manufacturing operation on the day, the cargo you're reliant on does not show up and you didn't know it. Right. Yeah. So you can't plan, you can't adjust, you can't work with your ultimate customer and work the issues. So we want to give reliability as best we can through data, and all of our stakeholders want to use that data to help ensure that reliability. But when things happen, we also want to give visibility and predictability as to when the recovery is going to occur, so that the ultimate, user of the cargo can plan their business. That will give them the confidence on a sustainable basis to vote with their feet back to rail, to say, hey, I got all three of those benefits: ESG, cost, efficiency, and now I've got service. I got to go back to rail. That's what we want to see happen for the industry.
David, it was such a great little section. I really appreciate that summary, because for me, that put a lot of the different discussion elements into one sort of vision. And we've got questions here from the audience, like things like, what is the value proposition for real-time tracking and health monitoring? And pretty much you just summarized the opportunities. But obviously, when we drill down into these things, then there's things that we don't yet know. Mike, is there anything that you'd like to add to what David just said in terms of maybe an outsider perspective? Is that going to be enough to make these transport users, shippers, cargo owners, they're going to go back to rail when they get those things? Do you see that as a realistic proposition?
I think the biggest thing I agree with is service. I think if the service is there, if it's truck-like, then intermodal is going to grow faster than the freight market overall. And if it's not good, then it won't. I mean, historically, intermodal was sort of the avenue for growth in the railroads, and was for decades. In the last few years, it really hasn't done that, because you've had issues with service, and lately rails have had issues getting the personnel in the door and trained, and have had issues with that they really haven't experienced in past cycles. But would definitely say that service is really important. Another thing that I hear from shippers is they really want to know sort of how what they're paying compares to the market. And so, like, let's say a big CPG company that runs in 100 lanes, they want to know which lanes that it looks like they're paying more than the market, and by how much, and so they can negotiate harder on those lanes because there's more room there. But they also want to know where they are paying maybe less than the market, because that's where there's a risk that they're not going to get coverage, particularly on the highway, that their loads might be rejected because their contract rates are not high enough, and some of those lanes could be really critical. So we hear a lot about benchmarking and helping shippers negotiate upcoming proposals.
So we reached the end of the podcast, of the webinar. It's absolutely flown by. I don't know how you guys feel, but we could definitely go for another hour. We've got questions from the audience that we're going to have to ignore around data ownership, around whether locomotives are going to be connected, more about shipment services. So there's all kinds of questions, and there's lots of interest on this. Now, I'd just like to say thank you to both of you. First of all, David, thank you for bringing the latest from RailPulse and for giving us such a nice, succinct summary of the value proposition and how we can extract value for different stakeholders and what shippers really need now and what's going to make the difference to bring them back to rail from other transport means. And Mike, I'd really like to thank you for bringing that outside perspective from the market and to start thinking a little bit about, how people from the finance side see this, and how people from, sort of the who are looking at from an analytics point of view to make decisions, long-term strategic decisions for all kinds of different businesses. And, I think that we're on a really great track here, and I'd love to continue these discussions again if you'd both be interested to come back at some point and we can see how things are progressing. But I'd like to wrap it up now and I say thank you for the audience for joining. And I look forward to our next meeting, whether that's online or in person. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Dan.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.